Benji Cooper was on the cold, filthy tiles of the Lincoln High School boys' bathroom, his body trembling with humiliation and fear. His palms pressed against the wet floor, his breath shallow, ragged. Somewhere nearby, his glasses lay broken, the lenses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above him. But he couldn't see anything, only blurred shapes moving in the periphery of his vision, distorted shadows that twisted and convulsed as laughter filled the space. "Look at this loser. He can't even find his glasses." Chase Miller's voice rang out, mocking and cruel, rising above the chorus of snickers and taunts. Benji groped blindly across the floor, his fingers brushing against the sharp edge of a shattered lens. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the relentless jeers. He needed to get up. He needed to make this stop. But before he could push himself off the ground, Chase's foot pressed down on his shoulder, shoving him back into the grime. "Stay down, nerd," Chase sneered. "You like looking at the stars, don't you? Well, enjoy the view from the bottom." Bathroom erupted into laughter. The sharp sting of shame burned through Benji's skin, hotter than any slap. He clenched his jaw, fighting the sting in his eyes, his fingers curling into fists against the tiles. He couldn't let them see him cry. Not here. Not now. A notification pinged from one of the phones surrounding him. "Dude, it's blowing up already." Tyler Harris grinned, holding his phone up. "This is gonna be legendary." Benji swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He knew exactly what that meant. The video was already spreading, jumping from one screen to another, multiplying like a disease. In just a few minutes, the entire school would see him like this, pathetic, helpless, humiliated. He tried again to rise, forcing his hands against the floor, but Chase's foot shoved him back down. "Did I say you could get up?" Benji's breath hitched as another round of laughter echoed in his ears. The smell of cheap cologne, damp paper towels, and the sharp metallic scent of blood, his blood, filled his nose. He had to make this stop. Benji twisted sharply, knocking Chase's foot, off balance just enough to roll away. He scrambled to his knees, ignoring the pain shooting up his ribs, reaching for his glasses, only for Tyler to snatch them up and dangle them out of reach. "Looking for these?" Tyler smirked, waving them in front of Benji's face. The group howled with laughter, the phone cameras catching every second. Benji's vision was a blur, but he could still make out their shapes, their silhouettes shifting like phantoms around him. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like a wounded animal surrounded by hungry wolves. "Let him go," a voice muttered from the back. It was weak, hesitant. Chase turned his head, eyes narrowing. What was that? Silence. Benji didn't know who had spoken, but it didn't matter. No one was going to stop this. No one ever did. His fingers curled around the shattered remains of his glasses, the broken frame pressing into his palm. A sharp edge bit into his skin, but he barely noticed. He was too consumed by the weight of humiliation pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. The laughter, the flashing cameras, the mocking words slashing at his dignity like razor blades. And then, suddenly, it all stopped. Not because of mercy, not because of guilt, but because the damage had already been done. Chase clapped his hands together, satisfied. "All right, boys, I think that's enough. Let's give our boy some space. He's got a lot to think about." Tyler tossed the remains of Benji's glasses onto the ground, the shattered plastic skidding across the tiles. They stepped over him like he was nothing, like he wasn't even there, and sauntered out of the bathroom, their laughter fading into the hallway. Benji stayed on the ground, his body shaking, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wanted to scream, to break something, to disappear. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the cold tile, eyes squeezed shut. He already knew, by lunchtime, the whole school would have seen the video. By the end of the day, people from other schools would be sharing it. By tomorrow, strangers on the internet would be making jokes at his expense, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The shame had already spread. Everything went black. Benji Cooper never expected to be popular. He never wanted to be. Unlike the kids who lived for the spotlight, athletes, influencers, social climbers, he was content blending into the background. If he could spend his high school years unnoticed, slipping through the cracks like a ghost, that would be enough. But life at Lincoln High didn't work that way. Being invisible wasn't an option. If you weren't part of the crowd, you were a target. Most days, Benji took shelter in the library, hidden behind thick astronomy books and noise-canceling headphones. It was the safest place in the school, the one spot where people left him alone. Out there in the hallways, he was just another easy mark. The nerd with the thick glasses. It wasn't like he was some genius kid, the type who aced every test or won national science fairs. He wasn't rich, wasn't athletic, wasn't connected. Just an average student with a passion for the stars, dreaming of Princeton, knowing full well that most kids at Lincoln saw him as a joke. Home wasn't much of a refuge either. His father, a man of rigid expectations, never understood him. You have to stand up for yourself, Benji. No one respects a pushover. It wasn't advice. It was a command. His father had spent his life fighting for everything. College, career, success, and he expected his son to do the same. But Benji had no interest in fighting. He didn't want to prove anything. He just wanted to exist without having to defend himself every second of the day. His mother, in contrast, suffocated him with protection. "It'll pass, sweetheart," she would say when he came home with a torn backpack or missing books. High school doesn't last forever. But to Benji, it felt like a prison sentence. 4 years trapped in a place where every moment was a potential threat. It wasn't outright violence, not most of the time. It was the small things. A shoulder slammed into him in the hallway. His locker mysteriously jammed shut. His name muttered in disgust when he walked by. It was death by 1,000 cuts, slowly bleeding away any sense of safety. The worst part was the way it all built up. How little by little it escalated. The first time someone knocked his books out of his hands, he told himself it was an accident. The first time his name was scrawled in Sharpie on a bathroom stall, Cooper the Creep, he told himself no one would remember it in a week. But then came the whispers in class, the smirks, the knowing glances. Then came the pranks, the accidental spills on his notes, the gum in his chair, the cruel DMs from anonymous accounts. He had convinced himself that as long as he kept his head down, it wouldn't get worse, that if he ignored it, they would get bored and move on. But that wasn't how it worked, because while he was busy trying to disappear, someone else had already decided that he was next. It started with a text, a simple message sent in the school's private group chat, the one where the popular kids schemed, gossiped, and tore people apart for entertainment. "This nerd needs a lesson." Chase Miller had typed it casually, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Within seconds, reactions poured in. Thumbs ups, fire emojis, skulls. The idea took root, spreading like wildfire. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why. Because at Lincoln High, things like this didn't need a reason. Someone like Benji Cooper was just easy prey. Benji had no idea what was coming. As he walked through the halls that Tuesday morning, everything felt the same. The same murmurs. In the background, the same indifferent faces passing him by. He adjusted his glasses, clutching his books close to his chest, his mind already drifting to the astrophysics problem he'd been working on. He didn't notice the glances, the way some students smirked as he passed, the way a few of them whispered behind their hands, not until he reached the bathroom. The first sign was the door. The way it swung shut the moment he stepped inside, sealing him off from the outside world with a dull, final-sounding click. The second sign was the laughter. "Hey, Cooper," Chase's voice rang out, casual, amused. Benji turned, his stomach twisting. Chase was leaning against the sink, arms crossed, blocking the exit. Beside him stood Tyler Harris, phone in hand, the red record button glowing. 2 more guys flanked them, faces alight with cruel anticipation. Benji's grip on his. Books tightened. "What do you want?" His voice came out steadier than he expected. Chase grinned. "Your glasses." Before Benji could react, Tyler lunged forward, yanking them from his face. The world instantly blurred, twisting into a smear of color and shadow. His heartbeat pounded. In his ears. "Hey!" A flash of movement. Something hard slammed into his chest, Chase's open palm, sending him stumbling backward. His books scattered across the floor. The laughter grew louder. Benji groped for his glasses, his hands skimming over cold tile. His pulse roared in his ears. He could hear the sound of Tyler's phone capturing every second, the cruel comments, the mockery, the notifications dinging as the video was uploaded. "Look at him," Chase snickered. "Lost without his glasses, like a little blind rat." Benji clenched his fists. His breathing was ragged, his vision swimming. He wanted to stand up, to fight back, to say something that would make them stop. But before he could, a foot pressed against his back, shoving him down. "Stay there, nerd," Chase murmured. "You like looking at the stars, right? Enjoy the view from the floor." The room exploded with laughter. The sound of a new notification echoed through the space. The video was already spreading, and in that moment, Benji knew. This wasn't just another bad day. This was the day everything changed. Benji didn't go to school the next day, or the day after that. He barely left his room. The world outside had collapsed into a single, suffocating truth. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew. The video had spread like wildfire, jumping from one phone to another, passed around in group chats, reshared with laughing emojis and cruel captions. By lunchtime, it was no longer just a Lincoln High thing. Other schools had picked it up. Strangers were commenting. Some kids had even turned it into a meme, overlaying music, zooming in on his outstretched hands as he fumbled blindly for his glasses. Guess he finally found his place. The stars sure looked different from the floor. Bro got turned into a hashtag. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in, some anonymous, some from classmates who had never spoken to him before, but suddenly found it hilarious to pile on. "Dude, just transfer schools. You're trending. LMAO. Delete yourself. Seriously." His stomach twisted every time the screen lit up, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it off. It was like watching his own funeral in real time, a slow-motion car crash he couldn't look away from. His mother knocked on his door, her voice filled with concern, but he told her he had a headache. His father barely said anything at all, but Benji could feel the disappointment radiating off of him like heat. That night, his parents sat him down at the dinner table. His mother tried to be comforting, placing a gentle hand over his. "It'll pass, sweetheart. People forget these things quickly." Benji let out a hollow laugh. She didn't get it. This wasn't like a bad grade or a rumor that would fade in a week. This was permanent. No one would forget. No matter where he went, that video would always exist. His name would always be attached to it. His father, on the other hand, was furious, not at the school, not at Chase or Tyler, but at him. "We're going to the principal tomorrow," he said, his tone sharp, edged with something dangerously close to shame. "This is unacceptable." Benji knew what he meant, not just what had happened, but the way he had let it happen. The way he had been weak. The next morning, they sat across from the principal in her office, his mother gripping his hand tightly, while his father leaned forward, jaw clenched. "This was an assault," his father said, his voice calm but deadly. "It wasn't just bullying. It was filmed, distributed, and turned into a public humiliation campaign. What is the school going to do about it?" The principal sighed, folding her hands on her desk. "Mr. Cooper, I understand your concern, but these are teenagers. Sometimes they make mistakes." Benji's breath hitched. "Mistakes?" his father repeated, incredulous. "My son was physically assaulted. Do you understand how serious this is?" "We do," she said smoothly. "We've spoken to the students involved. They regret their actions." That was it. That was the school's version of justice. A slap on the wrist. A polite conversation. Maybe a warning on their records that wouldn't mean anything. Benji felt his nails digging into his palms under the table. His father was still arguing, his voice rising in frustration. But Benji already knew how this would end. The school wouldn't do anything. They never did. Not unless it was something they couldn't sweep under the rug. And for the first time, something inside Benji snapped. He wasn't going to be another forgotten victim. He wasn't going to let them walk away like nothing had happened. This wasn't over. Benji sat at his desk that night, his face illuminated by the cold blue glow of his laptop screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding. The school wasn't going to do anything. They had made that clear. A slap on the wrist, a forced apology. Nothing that actually mattered, nothing that would make them understand. But the video, the same one that had ruined him, was also proof. It was the undeniable truth, immortalized in pixels and sound. So he started searching legal rights, school liability, cyberbullying cases. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. His hands trembled as he clicked through articles, reading stories of students who had fought back, who had taken legal action and forced real change. There were precedents, laws protecting students from harassment, regulations holding schools accountable when they failed to act, and Lincoln High had failed miserably. The next morning he walked downstairs, gripping his laptop like a weapon. His parents were in the kitchen, his mother making coffee, his father reading the news on his tablet. "I want to sue the school," Benji said. His voice was steady. His father looked up, skeptical at first. But when Benji placed the screen in front of him, the skepticism faded. Pages of legal cases, news reports, state laws. His mother gasped as she skimmed through the information. His father, always the pragmatist, leaned in closer, reading with sharp eyes. "You understand what this means?" his father said after a long silence. "This isn't just about Chase and those idiots. You'll be making a lot of people uncomfortable." "I don't care," Benji said. "They didn't protect me. They didn't do their job. And if they won't fix this, then someone else has to make them." For the first time in days, his father looked at him with something other than disappointment. He nodded. By the afternoon, they had contacted a lawyer, Elaine Carter, a woman with a reputation for handling student harassment cases. She didn't waste time sugarcoating things. "If you do this," she told Benji over the phone, "your life is going to change. Schools don't like scandals. People are going to come after you, say you're overreacting, trying to ruin kids' futures. The administration will protect itself first. You'll make enemies." Benji gripped his phone tighter. He thought of the laughter in the bathroom, the way they had filmed him like he was nothing, the way the principal had dismissed him like an inconvenience. "I don't care," he said. "I want to do this." The case was filed within days. What started as whispers in the halls quickly erupted into full-blown chaos. Local news stations picked up the story. Reporters showed up at the school, interviewing students in the parking lot. The administration scrambled to contain the damage, issuing generic statements about school safety and appropriate disciplinary measures. But no one was buying it. Not when the video was still being shared. Then the protests started. Students, ones who had been silent before, began speaking up. Some of them had their own stories. Some of them had suffered in silence, afraid of retaliation. But now, with the spotlight on Lincoln High, they weren't afraid anymore. Benji wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a symbol, and for the first time, Chase and Tyler weren't laughing. The message came late at night. Benji was lying in bed, scrolling through news articles about the lawsuit when his phone buzzed. He expected another anonymous insult, another troll telling him he was weak. But when he saw the name on the screen, his fingers froze. Tyler Harris. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to let the message rot in his inbox like all the others. But something about it made his stomach twist. "We need to talk. Alone." He stared at the words, then at the time. 11:42 p.m. Nothing good ever came from a message like that. He should have ignored it, but instead, his fingers moved on their own. Where the response came instantly. The park. 10 minutes. Benji sat up, his heart hammering. This was stupid. This was beyond stupid. It had to be a trap. Maybe Chase put him up to it. Maybe someone was waiting to humiliate him again. But no. Chase had been silent lately, too busy dealing with the fallout of the lawsuit. And something about the way Tyler had written the message, it didn't feel like a setup. Still, he wasn't dumb. He grabbed his hoodie, stuffed a small pocket knife into his jeans, just in case, and slipped out of the house without a sound. Park was empty when he arrived. The swings creaked softly in the wind, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows over the pavement. And there, sitting on one of the swings, hood pulled up, was Tyler. Benji stayed a few feet away, arms crossed. If this is some kind of joke, it's not. Tyler's voice was flat. No sarcasm, no arrogance. Benji narrowed his eyes. Tyler had always been Chase's right-hand man, the one holding the camera, the one laughing the loudest. He had never been the one to reach out, never been the one to care. Tyler sighed, running a hand through his hair. I saw the video again, Benji scoffed. Yeah? And what? You suddenly grew a conscience? Tyler flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he let out a slow breath. I saw myself, really saw myself. His fingers clenched. And I hated what I saw. Benji didn't answer. He didn't trust whatever game Tyler was playing. Tyler kept his eyes on the ground. You don't know what it's like, growing up with someone who treats you like garbage, someone who makes you feel like you're nothing unless you're the one in control. His voice was tight, forced. I spent my whole life being told that being weak was the worst thing you could be, that if you weren't the one doing the hurting, you were the one getting hurt. Benji swallowed hard. He knew that feeling all too well. My dad, Tyler continued, his voice barely above a whisper. He's not a good guy. He's the kind of person who makes sure you know exactly where you stand. And if you stand in the wrong place, you don't stand for long. He exhaled sharply. I used to think that if I could be like him, if I could control things, I wouldn't end up like you. Benji stiffened. Tyler shook his head. That came out wrong. What I mean is, I was afraid of being weak. I thought that if I laughed at you, if I helped Chase, it would prove I wasn't worthless. He let out a bitter chuckle, but all it did was prove that I was exactly like him. For the first time, Benji saw it. The exhaustion in Tyler's face, the way his hands trembled slightly, the dark circles under his eyes. He looked broken. You, and think telling me this makes everything okay? Benji's voice was sharp. You think I'm supposed to feel bad for you now? No, Tyler met his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve that. But I needed you to know. He exhaled, looking away. I'm sorry, Benji, for everything. Silence stretched between them. The cold air bit at Benji's skin. He could walk away. He could let Tyler rot in his own guilt, let him suffer the way Benji had suffered, but for some reason he didn't, because Tyler was right. He didn't deserve forgiveness, but maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to change. Benji sat at his desk the next morning, staring blankly at the half-eaten bagel on his plate. His mind was still trapped in last night's conversation, replaying Tyler's words over and over. He hadn't told anyone, not his parents, not even himself, really. But the weight of it pressed against his chest. He had spent weeks seeing Tyler as nothing but another monster, another face in the crowd of people who wanted to tear him down. And now he wasn't sure what to think. At school, the atmosphere had shifted. The lawsuit had turned Lincoln High into a battlefield of whispered conversations and careful glances. Teachers avoided eye contact with him, like he was a ticking bomb. Some students muttered their support, others thought he was overreacting. And then there were the ones who still sided with Chase, who saw him as a traitor for dragging the school's name through the mud. But Chase, he was quiet. Benji knew why. The administration was scrambling to control the damage, and Chase was at the center of it. His father, a man with deep pockets and an even deeper sense of entitlement, had already tried to pull strings, but this time money wasn't enough. Too many people were watching now. Tyler, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. Benji found himself scanning the halls for him, something he never would have done before. When he finally spotted him near his locker, Tyler looked different. His shoulders weren't squared with that cocky arrogance anymore. His usual smug smirk was gone. He looked smaller, almost like a ghost of himself, and for the first time since the video, no one was standing next to him. Benji had a choice. He could keep walking, pretend last night never happened. That would be easier. Tyler deserved to be alone. He had made his bed, but instead Benji stepped forward. The second Tyler saw him, his body tensed, like he was preparing for a punch that wouldn't come. Benji's voice was flat. "What happens now?" Tyler blinked. "What? You said you don't expect forgiveness." "Fine. So what happens now?" Tyler hesitated. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking down. "I don't know." Benji narrowed his eyes. "You don't know?" Tyler exhaled sharply. "What do you want me to say, Cooper? That I've magically fixed everything? That I woke up and suddenly became a better person?" He let out a bitter laugh. "It doesn't work like that." "No, it doesn't," Benji said. "But that doesn't mean you get to do nothing." Tyler stared at him, the weight of the words sinking in. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I'll figure it out," he said. Benji studied him for a long moment. He wasn't sure if he believed him. But for now it was enough, because real change wasn't easy. It was a choice, every single day. The air at Lincoln High was different now. Tense, uneasy. The lawsuit had shifted everything, turning what was once routine into something unstable, unpredictable. Teachers glanced at Benji like he was radioactive. Students whispered behind their hands, and the administration was scrambling, desperate to prove they had things under control. But they didn't. They never had. Benji walked through the halls and felt the weight of eyes on him. Some were watching with curiosity, others with quiet respect, a few with resentment. But no one ignored him anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't just another kid trying to survive. He had forced them to see him. The changes started small. First, a meeting, one of those carefully staged school-wide assemblies where the principal spoke in vague terms about inclusivity and addressing concerns. Students rolled their eyes. No one believed in speeches, not anymore. But then, something real happened. Signs went up, hotline numbers, anonymous reporting forms. The school was finally being forced to acknowledge the problem, to put things in writing, to act. Then came the cameras, new security installations in the hallways, in the stairwells, even outside the bathrooms. Chase Miller's little empire of fear had relied on secrecy, on moments when no one was watching. But now, there were always eyes. His power was slipping and everyone knew it. Chase himself was unraveling. He still had his followers, the ones who clung to the old ways, but the foundation was cracking. The school was no longer looking the other way, and for the first time, he was vulnerable. His father had tried to intervene, had threatened legal action of his own, but public pressure was a monster even money couldn't control. Benji wasn't the only one who had stepped forward. Other students had come forward with their own stories, stories of bullying that had been ignored, of complaints that had been dismissed. The lawsuit had been a spark, and now the fire was spreading, and in the middle of it all was Tyler. Benji saw him in the cafeteria one afternoon, sitting alone at a table that had once been filled with Chase's inner circle. The absence of power was a strange thing. It left people exposed, hollow. Tyler looked up and met Benji's gaze across the room. He didn't wave. He didn't try to speak. He just nodded. A silent acknowledgement. He was trying. For the first time, Benji believed it. Lincoln High would never be the same, and neither would he. The weight of everything that had happened still hung in the air. The lawsuit, the protests, the way Lincoln High had been forced to change, forced to see what it had ignored for so long. But for Benji, the biggest shift wasn't in the school itself. It was in the people, in the ones who had always looked the other way, in the ones who had laughed, in the ones who had hurt him, and in the ones who were trying to be better. Tyler had changed. Not overnight, not in some dramatic movie-style redemption arc. He didn't wake up one morning and suddenly become a different person. It was slower, quieter. It was in the way he started walking through the halls alone instead of with Chase's crowd. In the way he spoke less, listened more. In the way he stopped laughing when other people were being made fun of. Benji noticed it all even when he didn't want to. They hadn't spoken much since that night at the park, but the silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was something else, something neither of them knew how to name. So when Tyler approached him one afternoon, Benji wasn't surprised. They were standing outside the school, the late afternoon sun stretching their shadows across the pavement. Tyler shoved his hands into his pockets, his jaw tight, like he was forcing himself to be there. "I wanted to say something," he said, looking at the ground. Benji crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Tyler exhaled sharply. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that, but I don't want to be that person anymore." He looked up then, his eyes serious. "I don't know if I'll ever make up for what I did, but I'm trying." Benji studied him for a long moment. There was no arrogance in his posture, no expectation of being let off the hook. Just honesty. "I'll never forget what you did," Benji said, his voice steady. "But I won't pretend you didn't change either." Tyler nodded slowly. There was something like relief in his expression, but he didn't smile. He didn't expect a happy ending, and neither did Benji. They weren't friends. They never would be. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't enemies anymore. Maybe that was enough. The auditorium was packed. Rows of students filled the seats, some whispering, some scrolling through their phones, but all of them waiting. Teachers lined the sides of the room, their expressions carefully neutral, the administration perched. In the front row, stiff-backed and silent, the lawsuit had forced their hands, and this ceremony, this carefully orchestrated celebration of growth, was meant to be their final attempt at regaining control. Benji stood backstage, gripping the edges of the podium he was about to step behind. His hands were cold, his stomach twisted with something between anticipation and dread. He hadn't asked to speak, he hadn't wanted to, but after everything, after the lawsuit, after the backlash, after the months of being both ridiculed and praised, this was his chance to say something that mattered, to make sure the school understood that nothing about what had happened could be swept under the rug. The principal finished her generic speech about community and resilience, and then, suddenly, it was his turn. Benji stepped forward. The murmurs quieted. Even the ones who hated him, the ones who had stood by Chase, who had whispered that he was weak, were listening now. He adjusted the mic, took a breath, and spoke. "I was told once that just existing isn't enough," he began. His voice was steady, clear, that you have to prove yourself, that if you don't fight, you get trampled. That's what this place teaches you, right? That it's just the way things are. He scanned the crowd, finding familiar faces. Some sympathetic, some cold. Tyler sat in the back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For years, this school let things slide, the bullying, the silence, the way everyone acted like it was normal. His fingers curled against the wood of the podium. When I was humiliated, when my face became a joke, when the video spread, they told me it would pass. that people forget. He exhaled sharply. But no one forgets. Not really. They just pretend it never happened. A hush settled over the room. I was never supposed to fight back, Benji continued. I was supposed to disappear, to let people like Chase get away with it, to let the school cover it up. But I didn't. And I won't. His eyes locked onto the administration, in the front row, and neither should anyone else. He let the words hang in the air. The message was clear. The room erupted in applause, some loud, some hesitant, but there. As he stepped down from the stage, a hand clapped his shoulder. He turned. Tyler, you really don't hold back, huh? Tyler smirked, but it wasn't mocking. Benji shrugged. Guess not. They weren't. Friends, maybe they never would be, but Tyler wasn't Chase, not anymore. And maybe that was enough. Lincoln High had changed, and so had he.
If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.